in Hutchinson. And the reason we were playing it was our speaker last month, maybe the month before, was about, he was talking about auto polo. And so there were some clips in that. I'm pleased, and this is a little bit of bragging, but last night was Best of Topeka. You may have read about it in the paper. There were 700 people at the Expo Center, and the Kansas Museum of History won Best Museum and Best Historic Site. Yay! Tomorrow, we have our last behind-the-scenes tour for this year. These cost $15 for the hour-and-a-half tour for non-members. For members, it's $4. And this is an opportunity for you to see those things we've been collecting for 144 years. It is a walking tour. It's done by 3 curators of archaeology, archives, and the museum. I'll be doing it. And it starts at 2 o'clock. You can buy tickets online or get here early and buy them. We have a cap of 45 people because we have to keep the group small, but 120,000 objects, and you get to see them all tomorrow in the museum's collection, and then see the 4 million miles of boxes. And I also would like to promote Westfest. I brought Trigger here to remind me. This is our day to celebrate the Day of the Cowboy. It is a week from tomorrow, September 21st. It's great for families with young children, like 10 and under. We have a lot of sponsors. We have free lunch. We have horses. We have, if it's on your bucket list to ride in a stagecoach or a buckboard, this is your opportunity, so come on out. Saturday, September 21st from 9 to 3. And regular admission price applies, but you get all this more. And you even can have Lolly make you a balloon animal. I had a stormtrooper last time. She's amazing. Next month, October 11th, our speaker is John Hart, and he is a descendant of John Benton Hart. And John Benton Hart is kind of an interesting Kansan because he was with the 11th Cavalry and fought in a number of battles. He kept a diary, so that's what his descendant used to write the book, which I have over there on the table, and we will be selling them next month. We are videotaping the program, so you can watch it again and again, and our past programs are on videotape. And I think I've got through all my announcements except to introduce Mark. Mark Hull is a wonderful speaker. He is from the Command General Staff College in Leavenworth. He's a lawyer and a historian. You did that. I was embarrassing you, wasn't I? He has been here twice before to speak on lawfare in laws of World War I, and then Germans on the home front in World War I. World War II. I was close. I had a 50-50 option there. Tonight he's going to talk about Fatty Arbuckle, whose connection to Kansas is Smith Center, and it's a fascinating talk. I'm not going to say anymore. I think you're all waiting in anticipation to hear this amazing story, so please join me in welcoming Mark Hull. Taking my horse.
Good evening. And by the way, in defense of the state of California, I would like to say that it also was settled for a cause, but the cause was free money. Our apologies. Tonight, I want to tell you a story, and there's multiple parts to it, and I hope you find it as interesting as I do. The city of San Francisco has been host involuntarily to a number of really interesting murder cases, and this is kind of one of those, but it's one of the most celebrated within the city. But weirdly, I find that if I ask people, even that I work with, most of them don't remember or have never learned who Fatty Arbuckle was. And the ones that do think that, well, he wasn't. He was the guy that was convicted and no, he wasn't. So I want to go through the facts of the case, but I also want to give you some context in terms of what's going on with this. And even best, in terms of tonight's presentation, I have a show and tell item I brought for you, which I'll be circulating, which has kind of a weird, interesting history behind it as well. Plus, and I know you're just going to be overjoyed with this, 2 silent film clips. Because in doing my background for the case, I ended up watching a lot of silent film, which is something I had just never done before. And one of the most amazing discoveries that I made of something I had no idea about was the fact that Fatty Arbuckle was genuinely, almost timelessly funny. And I want to share a little bit of that with you before we get into what happened in 1921, 1922. Okay, it's going to be one of those evenings. All right. But first, let's set a little bit of background. Once upon a time, there was a case in the United States Supreme Court, Mutual Film Corporation versus Industrial Commission of Ohio, 1915, which, in response to early concerns about motion pictures, said, thank you, that films, movies, can be used for evil, and we cannot regard the censorship of movies beyond the power of government. So that the government should, as a duty to the community, step in and decide if films are... Oh, you're okay.
I just gotta get in there.
One back.
Keep going. Am I going back or forward?
There you go.
This is it.
Okay.
This is it.
Thank you.
All right, so you push forward.
Oh, that'll work, great. Yeah, thanks. So it's the duty, it's not only the responsibility or the right of the government, it's in fact the duty of the government to intervene and to select, examine, and weigh whether or not a film production or a stage production is appropriate given the community. Now, that is my way of introducing. I like to give you a takeaway each time, and tonight's takeaway is going to help you if you should ever have a child or a grandchild or a great-grandchild, and the question comes, what do you name the child? Because you can easily kind of get that wrong. This is the coolest name that I have ever seen in my life, and you probably want to keep this and remember if you can. Oh. I'm not kidding. This is this human being's name. His parents thought that this was the way they should go. So Metellus Lucullus Cicero Funkhauser, you're probably wondering who could this be? Well, he is in fact the censor for the city of Chicago. So his job, again based on the Supreme Court decision, is he and his agents will go and visit theater productions and motion picture productions to decide if in fact the films or plays or performances should be censored. He's the ultimate decision maker. If he says no, no. If he says cut this part, you cut this part. Otherwise, you don't perform the play or show the film within the municipal boundaries of Chicago. Which, in the case of The Spirit of 76, which is a movie that I'm pretty sure that nobody has ever heard of, largely because there are no existing copies of it. You can't find it anywhere. It doesn't exist. Because Metellus Lucullus Cicero Funkhauser decided that parts of it were inappropriate for audiences in 1917. The film is about the American Revolutionary War. It portrayed the British in an unflattering light. But what's happening in 1917 that causes, Mr. Funkhauser to get involved with this? But World War I breaks out, and there are new allies. And we can't have a film that is portraying our allies in a bad light. So Funkhauser says, cut these scenes. And the director, Mr. Goldstein, says he says he will do it, but then he does not do it, and he shows the film anyway. So Funkhauser confiscates the film. They destroy every print of it, which is why you can't find it anymore. So even as we get closer to the 1920s, what we have going on here is a couple of different things at the same time. On the one hand, we have artists, early motion picture silent film artists and theater artists who are trying to be creative and sort of figure out where the technology and where even the medium can go, versus communities that are locked in their own sort of battle for different sorts of values. The 19-teens in the 1920s, especially in America, are very contentious. You have a reactionary conservatist movement. You have prohibition, for the simple reason that alcohol is thought to lead to other forms of both social and personal depravity. And there's a growing religious movement, sort of a reactionary movement in the 1920s that plays all across the country. So those two things which are in conflict are going to merge by the time we get to 1921 with Roscoe Arbuckle. And I want to start out with two things. And the first is, I want to try to show you why he's funny. At the time that this scandal happens in 1921 over Labor Day, he is a star like you can't even imagine. I mean, there is nobody in the world that can compare to his celebrity. He's commanding a fee, an annual fee in the millions of dollars from his studio, because he's an absolutely surefire, bankable name to get people inside the theater. But I want to show you why he's sort of timelessly funny. Okay. Or maybe you could just imagine why he's timelessly funny. There we go. Thank you. All right, this is from a movie. It's called Fatty and Mabel Adrift, and I just want you to watch it for a second. And the setup here is it's a young couple, and they've just gotten married. And there's a dog in the film. His name is Luke the dog. He's, I think, in probably 35 or 40 different Hollywood films in the teens and early 20s. Luke the dog by himself is a huge star just because he's with Fatty Arbuckle. So the setup here is a newlywed couple, and he has never tasted her cooking. That's the setup. It's okay. Yes, the beauty of a silent film. I can't screw up the sound. Now, the lady there, her name is Mabel Norman. She is, like Roscoe Arbuckle, she is a huge, very bankable star. And by all accounts, a very nice person, in addition. So again, this is her first time cooking for her new husband. Things are not going well. If I really had skills, I'd play the piano for you while this was going on. But okay, so that's Luke the dog on the right-hand side. You're going to see him here more in a second. And if you've ever had a dog and you say the phrase like, "Did you do this?" That's the look you get when the dog just like kind of looks away. So, and I think the reason I like that so much is, again, it's just sort of objectively funny. So if it's funny in 2019, it was funny in 1918. And I think if you contrast this with even stuff that I remember seeing on television, that, okay, it's the Three Stooges or, you know, later like the Honeymooners or something, where it's, frankly, it's kind of mean. There's an undertone to it where people are being nasty to each other or they're being violent to each other. And Fatty Arbuckle just isn't like that. So even with the slapstick stuff. Okay, I guess that's my own version of slapstick. But the bottom line here is that there's still basic kindness and niceness, even when the comedy is very physical. And audiences responded to this really well. This is why he's a huge hit. He's in a gazillion different shorts, and he's just funny. Now, as time goes by and his star gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'll come back here in a second, we'll do some background bio on him. There is one other piece of film that I want to show you that dates from a little bit later, or actually this is a little bit earlier. So in 1915, San Francisco hosted what was called the Pan-Pacific International Exposition. And if you want to introduce this to cinema audiences all over the country, what you do, you get Fatty Arbuckle and Mabel Normand to go out and do a short about it. And that's what you have. So, this is 7 minutes into the short film. And it's a look at San Francisco in 1915, and the reason the 1915 thing was so big because, of course, it's immediately or within 10 years of the great fire or earthquake and fire in San Francisco. So this is San Francisco's chance to show off its renewal as a city, that it's come back, and this early footage is priceless in terms of like trying to get an idea of what the city looked like, 104 years ago now. So that's the St. Francis Hotel. It's on Union Square. You can still stay there. It's extremely nice. And this is a pan across Union Square. Admiral Dewey is the on top of the monument there, and we're going to kind of gradually pan up the front of the hotel. And if you know where to look on that upper floor, you could see the window of a room that's actually going to be the scene of the crime. Except this is 6 years before the crime happened. So the irony of Fatty Arbuckle filming a short inside the city featuring the hotel where his career is going to end up ending is very powerful. Okay. So, that's St. Francis today. And I'm very thankful to the Kansas Historical Society for giving me $10,000 so I could go and do research on your behalf. I was going to say I have receipts for things, and we can talk about that later. So Roscoe Arbuckle is born in Smith Center, Kansas, so north of here toward Nebraska. March 1887. He's got a tough childhood. It's poor, desperately poor. The father abandons the family. He comes out to California. They're struggling to make ends meet. He does a lot of kind of menial jobs just to bring money into the family. But eventually the father sends for him and tells him tells the mother essentially to put him on a train and send him to Santa Clara. And he gets to the train station, and of course his father doesn't happen to be there to greet him. And it's just there's just a lot of tragedy going on early in his life. But the fact is, he works this job and he transfers this to another job, and he eventually gets a job in the theater. And they realize that even though he's a big kid, he's incredibly funny. And specifically, he can sing, he can dance, he's very athletic, and he's just different than all the other people that are working sort of early vaudeville. He transfers to films. He is in the Keystone Cops movie from Max Sennett Productions. He's the guy on the right-hand side of the screen in these early, very early short silent films. He just has what you would today call star quality. So as the 19-teens go through, and America goes through the First World War, and then after the First World War, he is in, I could count them, I suppose, but a lot of movies that many of these are still around. You can still go and find them on YouTube. And they're funny. And he and Mabel Normand pair up, and that's the comedy duo. He's friends with Harold Lloyd. One of his great friends is Buster Keaton. He's a great friend with Charlie Chaplin. And that Buster Keaton-Charlie Chaplin thing is going to be important a little bit later. But everybody who meets him, both privately and professionally, will tell you essentially the same story. He's a nice guy. He's funny. He's making a lot of money, and so there is a little bit of conspicuous consumption, but not a whole lot. The thing that he likes best is his Pierce Arrow car. And it's still around. I don't know I forget what the last selling price was, but it's in the millions because it's the car that was owned by Roscoe Arbuckle. And of course, if you needed another one, there's a picture of Roscoe with Luke the dog in the car. And sorry, one more of the St. Francis. But over the Labor Day weekend of 1921, Arbuckle, who's been working just an incredibly tough schedule, sort of filming one movie back to back, decides to go with some friends to drive from Los Angeles up to San Francisco. And especially in 1921, this is a haul. Okay, today it's about 5.5 hours. Back then, it's usually a multi-day trip to go from LA to San Francisco because you don't have the highway system, or you don't have certainly the interstate system. And so that's what they do. And the idea here is once you get into the city, he's going to spend a couple of days in the St. Francis where he stayed before. just enjoy the city, enjoy the weather. September's a nice month to be in the city. But 1921 is also Prohibition. Yeah. The thing is, if you're in a city of any size, whether it's San Francisco or Chicago or Los Angeles or Kansas, God knows Kansas City during Prohibition, alcohol's around if you know where to go ask for it. And especially if you're Arbuckle, who actually brings some with him, but it's also the sort of place where you have nightclubs and dinners, and within an easy walk across, Union Square, there's a place called Maiden Lane where you could go and buy alcohol if you knew which door to knock on. It's a party atmosphere, but he's not a drunk. So this is just sort of part and parcel for the event that they have planned over Labor Day 1921. Now, we have kind of a cast of characters, and the most important of these is, anybody know her name? Virginia Rapet. She is, I think she's 29 in 1921. She is sort of a B-movie actress. She's never had a starring role, but she's been in some films, not a lot of them. Her name was originally Virginia Rapp. Her mother changed it. Her mother is like the early sort of stage mom to give her some more cachet. And her career really is going nowhere fast. I mean, she's never going to. She's really too old to break into the Hollywood mold of the film industry back then. She also has come up to San Francisco and sort of overhears and gets herself invited to a party that she hears that Roscoe Arbuckle is having at the St. Francis Hotel. And she's there with a very mysterious woman who plays sort of a central role in what happened, is named Maud Delmont. Now, it's tough to pigeonhole her because she's not really in the film industry and she's not really in anything else, but she has connections and ties. She knows people. And she's the friend who's come up to San Francisco with Virginia Rapet. They both sort of invite themselves to the Roscoe Arbuckle party, and that is what happens at the St. Francis. The party is sort of, like an open house, if you will. So, you take the elevator, you come into the hotel, you take the elevator up, you get off at the elevator stop, and then you go into the main room of 3 rooms on the 12th floor that Arbuckle has. So there is a central room, and then there are 2 bedrooms on either side of this thing. And these people, Maud Delmont is the woman on the lower left-hand side. She's the friend of Virginia Rapet. She's met Arbuckle once or twice, but they don't really know each other. The woman on the upper left-hand side, Sadie Rice, who also goes by the pseudonyms Zay Prevon, Zay Prevost, and Zay Previn, has been in some theater productions, but not really in sort of the same A-list group that Arbuckle. But she either is invited or invites herself to the party at the St. Francis. Alice Westphal, Virginia Rapet, we've already talked about. Lowell Sherman, he's a buddy of Arbuckle's. He's there. Fred Fischbach, and of course Fatty Arbuckle himself. What happens over the course of about an hour is critical to the event. And none of this comes to light except 2 days after the party finishes, when Maud Delmont, the woman on the lower left-hand side on the earlier slide, goes to the police department. It's been moved since then, and files a complaint saying that Roscoe Arbuckle assaulted her friend, Virginia Rapet. Virginia Rapet, in the meantime, since the party, has been taken to a private hospital. Her symptoms are seemingly gastrointestinal. She's got severe pain from her abdomen. She's in and out of consciousness. There are some nurses that talk to her, but Maud Delmont's story is flat, straight up. Roscoe Arbuckle assaulted, meaning sexually assaulted, her friend, Virginia Rapé, and he should be made to pay because he's committed a crime. So you have a weird dynamic here. Virginia Rapé will hang on for a little while longer, and eventually she dies. So the question is, who did what to whom, if anything? What happened at that party? Where, when, who saw it, which stories do you believe and why? And the investigation is going to reveal, it's like the worst sort of crime drama that you could imagine. There's a Japanese director, Akira Kurosawa, whose specialty, at least in one movie, is looking at a crime from the viewpoint of many witnesses, and each one of them has a different take on it. That's kind of what we have here. Every witness at the party will tell a different story. Maud Delmont is very emphatic. Arbuckle assaulted Virginia Rapé. She saw it. She didn't see the assault, but Virginia Rapé told her, Arbuckle did this. Arbuckle hurt me. Arbuckle attacked me. And, of course, Virginia Rapé is in the private room where Arbuckle is staying. So the police, in very short order, issue an arrest warrant for Roscoe Arbuckle, based largely on Maud Delmont's testimony. And that's when other factors start to come into play here. Some of them we already talked about. We have a very reactionary Puritan movement in America in the teens and early 20s, which is where we are now, which is that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and if we don't start getting tough on these things, it's going to get out of control. So what better cause could you possibly have than a Hollywood type before you really, that became part of the language. Assaulting an innocent young woman in a drunken party during Prohibition. I mean, damn, if you can't draw the line there, then you can't draw the line. So let us use this as a cause. But that's not the only group of people that are going to be used in the Arbuckle case as a cause. This person, if you've seen the movie Citizen Kane, you've seen the fictionalized version of him. Real life name is William Randolph Hearst. He publishes a newspaper in San Francisco called the San Francisco Examiner, which today is a free daily newspaper. It lost the newspaper war in San Francisco. But in 1921, it was the biggest thing going. And the way you sold newspapers in 1921 San Francisco is the same way that you helped get the U.S. into the Spanish-American War. Banner headlines. Oh my gosh. Fatty Arbuckle charged with actress murder. Arbuckle faces gallows. I mean, that shout out at you. And every day, Hearst's newspapers in San Francisco and within the Hearst syndicate are going to be publishing the most lurid headlines they can possibly publish to drive up circulation. Their reporters will report anything that may be helpful to that end. And it makes the Arbuckle case, rather than, we're not really sure what this is. Is it a murder? Is it an assault? Is it an assault that leads to murder? Or is it nothing? This is going to go out to the entirety of the country. So for the first time, and the Scopes trial in Tennessee is going to be kind of a version of this a little bit later. The idea here is that everybody every morning is watching their newspaper, hopefully their Hearst newspaper, to see what's happened latest in the Roscoe Arbuckle murder case. And opinion quickly shifts against Roscoe Arbuckle. And his attorneys that correctly tell him, job one is keeping your mouth shut, and that is good advice, and it still is. But the thing is, the Hearst newspapers were able to publish what they wanted whenever they wanted, without a lot of pushback. Virginia Rapé becomes victimized in a way by the coverage that she receives. She's portrayed as sort of a naive innocent who's just gotten off the bus in Los Angeles, and she's victimized by this menacing beast, Roscoe Arbuckle. And so she becomes almost typecast in a way, the same way that he does. And neither one of them really are very accurate, but they're both pieces in the puzzle as we go forward with the murder case. When the case comes both to arraignment, the grand jury proceeding, and eventually to the trial itself, in the front row of every court event for every day is a block of seats reserved for the Women's Vigilance Committee. And they're there to make sure that the moral voice is going to be heard. So they will dress alike every day and sit in the front row in their block of seats and make sure that we've made sure we've made a statement against drinking and dancing and jazz music and sexual liberality. And the fact that you would do this is an interesting thing. I would have trouble imagining something like that happening today, but I suppose it could. And this is the other player in the drama. His name is Matthew Brady. He's the district attorney for the city and county of San Francisco. He's been the DA for a while. He is very open about how much farther he would like his career to go, to include certainly the governorship of the state of California. And if that goes well, maybe a little farther. Because, of course, there's a later governor of California that, goes farther. But Brady could be the guy, and Brady's ticket to national attention has just been delivered to him on a platter. It's the Arbuckle case. Convict Arbuckle. You are now the champion, the white knight for right and justice and decency and morality. This is perfect. It's an absolutely sort of perfect storm that could work in Brady's favor. And it becomes apparent as the trial goes on, because there isn't a trial, there are 3 trials. Brady is not going to let this thing go, and he can't, because he's already sort of committed himself to the outcome of the trial. Now, later on, and especially as we get to trial number 3, when more people start coming forward with information, Brady is very, he's not afraid to threaten witnesses. He's not afraid to jail witnesses. He will do whatever he can to make sure the witnesses' statements are exactly on point, what they're supposed to be. And he breaks the law in many, many ways. He does things that a district attorney should never, ever do. But in his mind, of course, I'm doing this for the greater good. These are some of the things that are presented at trial, both to the grand jury and later to the trial jury. The left-hand side is a picture of underclothes that Virginia Rapé was wearing on the day of the party. So when the grand jury sees these without comment, you see that there are rips and tears in them, and one would jump to the conclusion, logically, that this is something that happened in a violent, frenetic outburst of assault, which is exactly what they needed the grand jury to think. The right-hand picture is a newspaper photograph from the Hearst newspapers that shows the condition of the Roscoe Arbuckle bedroom suite after the vicious assault on Virginia Rapé. I mean, that's like the Rolling Stones have been there. Except it isn't. Again, thanks to the generous contribution of the Kansas Historical Society, I was able to go to the St. Francis on your behalf, and this is what the actual room looks like. Yeah, if you compare that's not even, this is a set somewhere for something, but it's not the hotel room at the St. Francis. This is the actual hotel room at the St. Francis where Arbuckle stayed, where the event happened. So Arbuckle realizes he's got some trouble. He's been the most popular, most loved personality in America for years, and suddenly he can sense and see and read the people turning against him. And he's not really sure what to do about it. He's not going to take a plea, although originally Brady charges this originally as a first-degree murder case, which is absurd, just as a charging policy. So the idea that you could hang America's most beloved silent movie comedian that's what an alternative universe this has become. But that's what he's afraid of. Brady later realizes that he simply doesn't have, and the grand jury doesn't return an indictment for first-degree murder. And here's some issues that you're going to have. I'm going to do this in a more dramatic format. Okay, that's faster than I hoped for drama. Okay, so if we're doing this for dramatic, Maud Delmont, again, is the complaining witness against Arbuckle at the trial. The thing with Maud Delmont is she can't keep her story straight from one time to the next, and the second thing is she loves talking to the newspapers. So if you ask Maud Delmont what happened in Arbuckle's suite at the St. Francis, you get version 1. She says Arbuckle said, and of course this would be admissible at trial because it's a party admission, he said to Virginia Rapé, I've been trying to get you for 5 years now, and have you? You know, you can just feel the drama as you read this. And dragged Rapé against her will into his bedroom and locked the door. Oh my. Or, when asked again, I asked the others in the party room where Virginia was. I called to her and didn't get an answer. Or, when she talks to a third set of reporters, Virginia went into the next room and Arbuckle followed her in later. The two came out and stood in the doorway. Version 4. They had been in there an hour. I heard her screaming. I phoned the manager. Arbuckle heard the telephone and came out. He had on Ms. Rapé's Panama hat. Just a little flourish, for the story. Version 5. I felt anxious about Ms. Rapé being in there with him. I did not say anything for a few minutes. I called to her several times and kicked against the door at least a dozen times in the next hour. I'm telling you, the worst lawyer on earth could destroy her on the witness stand with this page alone. That's all I don't care what other information you have about her. This all by itself, and you can discredit her as a witness, which is why, ironically, even though she's the person that reported the crime to the police, and she's the genesis behind the district attorney's case, the district attorney, looking at her statements, realized, I can never put her on the witness stand, even though she's the complaining witness. So in none of the 3 trials, in none of the grand jury testimony, does Maud Delmont take the stand, because Brady fully understands that, again, even a bad lawyer could demolish the case. She is at the very least a fabulist. She can't keep her story straight. She makes a point of being the person that, if you're a newspaper reporter for the Chronicle or the Examiner or other papers, you want to go talk to her because she's always going to give you something. She's the worst witness a prosecutor could have. She's talkative, and she's a big fat liar. So that is part of the reason. In addition, a supporting witness who is at the party, this is Sadie Rice / Zay Prevon / Zay Prevost / Zay Previn, who has the same problem with keeping her story straight. So whether she's testifying at the grand jury or the trials, again, Mrs. Delmont, Maud, went over and knocked on the door, knocked a few times, then she kicked the door. When Mrs. Rapé and Arbuckle did not appear after about a half an hour, she knocked on the door. She did not kick. I saw her, Miss Rapé, go into Mr. Arbuckle's room and was not dragged in by him. She went in there of her own accord. She was in the room 10 minutes before Mr. Arbuckle even went near the door. Or version 4, Roscoe Arbuckle went into his bedroom, and then Ms. Rapé sort of skipped into the room behind him. Again, worst lawyer you've ever met in your life would destroy this witness. And this is sort of the evidence of the case. So you're having, if you know your chief witnesses are going to be harmed on the stand, what you're sort of left with is the autopsy report itself, which is not that definitive. It appears that she died from a ruptured bladder. So the question then becomes, is this something which occurred as a result of force? And if Arbuckle is the only person, you can put him, he is the only person in the room, and if you can prove that the force could not have been caused accidentally, it must have been caused by an outside agency, then he must be guilty. At the very least, he would be guilty of manslaughter. So if he inflicted the force on her, she died as a result of his criminal action, he would be guilty. So it hinges on whether or not that is the way the thing plays out, and it's just simply not that clear-cut. Brady's case, presented at grand jury at trial, is that this can only have been the result of a physical outside attack. And that's where you're going to get into an issue, too, with Virginia Rapé's medical history. Different doctors can reach and do reach different conclusions, and then the issue comes later, trial 2, and especially in a huge way in trial 3, whether or not these could have been the result of sexually transmitted diseases. And then you're getting into some really dangerous water here. Because in trial 3, the defense strategy is a lot more aggressive because there have been 2 trials that have been mistrials. To make the decedent, Ms. Rapé, sort of the centerpiece of the case. And they kind of, in the way they sort of take a dark path to get there. To get their client off, they have to make her appear promiscuous, diseased, bad history. There's any number of reasons why that her injuries would have been caused. They go into her background and they discover that she has a history of both sort of, if she has alcohol, she has an almost epileptic-like attack. So for some reason her body can't tolerate alcohol, and there have been a dozen cases in the past where Virginia Rapé has just suddenly started just ripping her own clothes off and almost going on a manic fit after drinking alcohol. Why you would continue to drink alcohol after that, I can't say. But the idea here is that those are the sorts of things the defense feels compelled to do to get their client off. And some of that makes me sort of a little bit queasy. But in any case, the case goes forward. Prosecution presents as witnesses minus Maud Delmont, but with some of the other guests at the party to include the medical evidence. Roscoe Arbuckle decides he takes the stand. He's really not breakable. He just tells his story. He says that he went into his room. There was nobody there. He found Ms. Rapé in the bathroom. She was obviously ill. He carried her back to the bed. He goes into the party room and says something's terribly wrong with her. People come in. They pack ice on her later. He leaves the party to go take a drive with a friend of his. And when he comes back to the party, she has already been transferred to another room, and that's the last he knows about her. So that is his version of events. It doesn't change appreciably from trial 1 to trial 2, and eventually he's convinced, essentially after trial 2, not to speak in his own defense at all. That turns out not to be a good strategy for him, because in the first trial, he is 1 vote away from acquittal, according to what people say later. So 11-1. The second trial, the ratio is just about the same, except going the other way. So he fires his defense team after trial 2. He goes with a brand new, again, the more aggressive defense team for trial 3, and that's when they go on the attack. They bring up the prosecution's intimidation of witnesses. They actually get Sadie Rice /Prevon/Prevost/Preven to testify that she has been threatened by the police and the prosecutor. So they just demolish the prosecution's case. Another sort of sideline or collateral figure here in the case is, her name is Minna Durfee. She is Fatty Arbuckle's wife, but they've been separated for quite some time. And I don't really know what to make of her. I mean, I've read a lot about her and about the case, and it seems that once she realizes that this could be an opportunity to continue to go to the press and talk about her steadfast belief in her husband's innocence, and yes, she's an actress also, not very successful. It gets her another moment in the spotlight, because as soon as the case is over, she evaporates and goes away. But it's almost like a situation where the trial brings out the worst and best in terms of Arbuckle's friends and acquaintances. You get people that have claimed, well, I've been his lifelong friend, and we're like this, and all the rest of this stuff, to get attention. But then they're either lying or they're exaggerating, or after the trial is over, they just simply go away. And they really do, a lot of people take advantage of him and his money. A couple of them don't, and I'll talk about them here in a moment. But this is the dynamic of the trial. And so in the space of time between Labor Day and February 1922, okay, within that, let's see, September, October, November, December, January, for 5 months, there are 3 trials. That's astounding. I've never heard of anything like that since then or before then. Brady, after the first verdict, says, I will retry Roscoe Arbuckle. After the second verdict, the people of this city and county and country demand that we retry Fatty Arbuckle. So we get to the third trial, and he's acquitted. And there's some weirdness with that, too, and so I'll show you that here in a second. I do apologize. One of the first rules of presenting or teaching is I don't like showing a lot of text if I can help it. First of all, it's going to force you into a decision whether you read or listen. Or I could do the worst of both worlds. I could turn my back on you and read the text to you, even though most of you, I'm pretty sure, can read and write. So I'm going to shut up for a second and just let you read. Yeah, just, damn it. Okay, well, while we're waiting, should I tell you the funny story about the time that I was presenting in like a stadium seat thing, and I have a projector behind me that's like as big, like a jumbotron that came detached from one side and swung down like a pendulum? That was a bad day for presenting. This is okay. That'll work fine. Thank you.
It is hard to read from the cheap seats.
What it sort of incentivizes getting here early. All right, so here's the funny thing about this. What happened on the third jury when the case goes to the jury, and with a case of this complexity, you have an estimation how long you think best case is going to take the jury to process the testimony and refer to their notes and maybe ask the judge a question, and then this could take days, certainly. This happened in 15 minutes. A perfect acquittal, 12 for 12, not guilty. Further, the jury came out and read to the court this statement that they say they all agreed upon and wrote in 15 minutes. No. So, I mean, that part, there's no way that could have happened. I mean, if you've ever tried to get 15 people to agree to anything, that's not going to happen in 15 minutes. So at some point before the case went to them, they had obviously discussed it among each other, and this is their thing they're ready for. So not only is he acquitted, he gets a statement of exoneration from the jury, and again, this is the only time I've ever heard of this happening. So there's no chance of refiling. You have double jeopardy. The Brady is done. The case has fallen apart. But weirdly, by this point, it's almost anticlimactic because people in the country have already formed an idea about his guilt, which is why still in 2019, when he asked people about Fatty Arbuckle, oh, wasn't he the guy that was convicted of murdering that woman in the hotel room? No, he wasn't that guy. He's the guy that got acquitted for killing the woman in the hotel room. But the end results of this, because of the issues involved, which go past sort of the guilt or innocence of Roscoe Arbuckle, couldn't come at a worse time, because while 1922 is a bad year for Hollywood, so you have Roscoe Arbuckle, whose career has just imploded. At the same time in Los Angeles, you've got another equally fascinating murder case that's never really been solved. A famous Hollywood director named William Desmond Taylor, left-hand side, is murdered in his bungalow, and the chief suspect, and honestly I think the person that almost certainly did it, is a teenage movie star called Mary Miles Minter. Or Mary Miles Minter, actually that's not really true. Mary Miles Minter is a suspect, but I think the person who's the evidence suggests did it was Mary Miles Minter's stage mother, who's obsessed with the idea that Taylor is somehow derailing her daughter's career, and the case again is never solved. And there's a whole series of suspects. There's the chauffeur. It's almost like a game of Clue. You know, you've got like the butler in the ballroom with the candlestick. It's a cool case, and if you get a chance, there's actually some interesting books about it. But sadly, one of the characters that gets drawn into this thing again, and this is a tragedy of the Fatty Arbuckle case, is Mabel Norman. So she's a lifelong friend of Fatty Arbuckle. Remember, she was the one in the clip Fatty and Mabel Adrift. She's upper right-hand side. She's a great friend of William Desmond Taylor. So her name hits the paper for a second time in connection with a murder. It destroys her career. She's not implicated, did nothing wrong in either case. She's a friend of Roscoe Arbuckle. She's a friend of William Desmond Taylor. But that association coming so close after the Roscoe Arbuckle case destroys her, and she never recovers. And it's a tragedy. It shouldn't have happened, but it does. Because of the sort of double hit that you get from the Arbuckle case and the William Desmond Taylor case, Hollywood realizes that it better do something fast in order to save itself from the perception that it is just a nest of criminals. They're losing box office revenue because people say, okay, we're just not going to go to see any more pictures anymore because the people that appear in them and make them are immoral, bad people, and this is the kind of thing that they do. So, to help clean up its own public relations image, Hollywood hires one of the most corrupt, and this is saying a lot, individuals from the President Harding administration. Okay, the former Postmaster General of the United States, Will Hayes, who admitted to taking money from Sinclair Oil. I mean, he's absolutely just a crook. But he's promoted himself after government service, because he had to leave, as somebody who's sort of a traveling gun for hire, and through a series of connections that I've never been able to completely clarify, he sells the motion picture industry on appointing him as the commissioner, with the promise that he can clean up Hollywood's image. So if you remember back to where this thing started with that 1915 Supreme Court case, which said the government has, in some cases, sort of a duty to police the moral image of the motion picture industry, when Will Hayes comes to Hollywood, things change. And you come up with what is called the Hays Code, which has a list of things thou shalt not see or show in motion pictures, to include, oh my God, this is two of them right here, which is a woman's bare leg and a man and woman sitting on anything even remotely resembling a bed, which is why when you get to television of the 1950s and 1960s, and you're wondering why Desi and Lucy are sleeping in two separate beds, perhaps you've wondered this. That's why. It's the same sort of, we're going to have a morality police inside Hollywood as a direct reaction to the Roscoe Arbuckle as well as to the William Desmond Taylor murder. Roscoe Arbuckle hopes that he will be able to go back to work as soon as the trial is over. And that's not going to happen. The case cost him $800,1922 to pay his legal expenses, which it bankrupts him. So he loses the house, he loses the Pierce Arrow. He does retain custody of Luke the dog, so there's a happy ending there. But he's never going to be allowed to work in this town again because of the stigma attached to his name, what really went on in that room. And just the fact that the jury acquitted him doesn't mean, to a lot of people, it doesn't mean he's innocent. That there was probably something that happened. He probably did something. There was something that went on, even if the jury couldn't see it, didn't see it. I mean, William Randolph Hearst newspapers, they still wrote that way for a while, that this is a horrible miscarriage of justice. Something happened. The jury was fooled. The jury was bought off. The jury was something. And he's really kind of still guilty. So his expectations are unrealized, and he is not, his movies are pulled from every theater in America. He's not allowed to make another one. The studios, Max Sennett and Famous Players Lasky was the last studio he worked with, and they were lucky to survive because of the Arbuckle stigma. But, you know, Arbuckle kept trying, and the two great friends that stuck with him the whole time, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, didn't desert their friend. So what Arbuckle was able to do as the 20s went on is they got him work behind the camera, uncredited. And they were they're like to play with the thing a little bit. So if, in some cases, I think there are, I don't know how many films, probably 9 or 10 films, where the director is credited as Will, W-I-L-L, B. Good. And it's Roscoe Arbuckle. So he's still able to make a living, not even a fraction of what he had before, but he's still able to stay in the studio business and the movie business, and they continue to help him and try to find him work. The story for him ends, I think, kind of sadly. He eventually, Minta Durfee, they get divorced, and Minta goes off to she eventually, I think, dies like in a studio retirement home. By 1933, he's remarried. He has just gotten word that there is a deal that is going to come through for him to where he can actually star in a feature film again. Of course, this time now a sound picture, 33. And he has a heart attack when he's out celebrating his return. So he never lives to see the redemption that he'd hoped would come to him after the Virginia Rapé murder case. And Luke the dog, apparently, it's unclear, because I did a weird, surprisingly time-consuming amount of research to try to figure out exactly what happened to Luke the dog. And nobody seems to know. You know, I asked around, and nobody's talking. But he was Roscoe's dog, and I think he just stayed with Roscoe, and that's the way that ended. So the end of the case is there's a lot of tragedy to go around here, right? You have the initial tragedy with this young woman who dies in the room at the St. Francis. You have the tragedy that directly involves Roscoe Arbuckle, who I think, based on sort of the preponderance of the evidence, didn't really do anything wrong, certainly not criminal. And then you have a lot of collateral damage. You have Mabel Norman as collateral damage. You have, in some ways, the Hollywood film industry as collateral damage. Because of the thing that happened in the hotel, and even, we're now just shy of 100 years later, I don't think anybody can say for certain, to a degree of scientific certainty, exactly what did happen or what precisely killed Virginia Rapé or why. But there certainly wasn't enough evidence to render a verdict of guilty. Now then, you can go to the St. Francis, and this is a particularly weird thing, but apparently people still go there and want to reserve the room where the crime happened. I am not one of those people, but you can go there, and I suppose they're going to love you at the front desk if you go in and you say, "Hi, I'm X, and I'd really like to stay in the Roscoe Arbuckle murder room, please." You can do it, but that's the outside of the room. It's room 1219. And Roscoe Arbuckle, there's still some echoes, if you know where to go listen for them. There's a chain of restaurants in Britain called Fatty Arbuckle's. Fatty Arbuckle's American Diner. It's not here in the States, it's just in Britain. And he does have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I think one of the beauties of YouTube and old movies is that you can go back and to your heart's content, you can enjoy some things that I think are genuinely funny and some things that are genuinely, they're an early part of our history, and you should go play there. That would be my recommendation to you. Short of that, I think it's time for me to shut up now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. Yes, sir.
Virginia Rapé, she lived for a day or two?
Yes, sir.
Well, you didn't mention, did she climb? Did she climb in the hospital to anyone?
They're
Arbuckle accosted her?
no. So the question is, what did Virginia Rapé? Oh, I'm sorry. I should have done this earlier. While we do the Q&A, if I can, I've got a show and tell thing for you, and there's a cool story with this. Let me tell you that real fast. This is a piece of sheet music from 1918. It is from a song called "Oh Helen," dedicated to Fatty Arbuckle, who's on the cover of this thing. Here's why you should remember this song, even though you've never heard it and probably never will. It is an attempt in 1918 to see if you can get around the censorship of guys like Metallus Funkhauser. It's called, unfortunately, a comedy stuttering song. And the reason that they did it that way is when you look at the name Helen, if you do it as the song does it in stuttering, what they're trying to do under the censor's eye is to get the words hell and damn into the song. So you get, oh, hell, hell, Helen, and you get, damn, damn, dame. And apparently it worked because the song was, it is still around on YouTube. Okay, a question before was in terms of what did Virginia Rapé tell people at the hospital. A couple of different things. They brought in a nurse on the third trial to testify that Virginia said that essentially this had nothing to do with Arbuckle, and that this was a history that she had that essentially that it was a disease as opposed to an injury. But sadly, it's not all that straightforward, because even the nurse that testified had given different statements that were slightly different from that as well. But that seems to be the case, that while she was at the hospital, and she was there again, for a couple of days before she died, that she did, it seemed to be this was a pre-existing condition. So that helped trial number 3, but that evidence wasn't available for trials 1 and 2. Yes, ma'am.
What happened to the district attorney after the trials?
Matthew Brady, the question was what happened to the DA after the trial. Matthew Brady's career came to a sudden involuntary halt. He wasn't reelected after the Arbuckle trial. That's a real tragedy that I'm still struggling to deal with.
The individual, the lady
Yes, sir.
who was the complainant?
Yeah.
What was the motive? Was that ever
That's
established?
actually kind of, I'm sorry I didn't mention that before, because one of the things that came out, again, this is after the trial was over, she gets arrested a couple more times, once for bigamy and once for passing bad checks. But it turned out that before she had gone to the police, she had demanded money from Arbuckle's agent. If you do not pay, I shall go to the police. And the thing is, I think she thought once this happened, she could sort of ride the popularity of this. People can't get enough of Maud Delmont. Certainly this will lead me to something more lucrative as time went on. She's a grifter, basically.
Was it true that the two friends that stood beside him were from Kansas?
It's a fascinating question. The question was, okay, so Buster Keaton and Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. You guys probably are going to help me out with this because I don't know. Buster Keaton, I don't know where Charlie Chaplin was from. He was British, wasn't he? Yeah. So we got one of two, or Kansas. And by the way, you guys are free to just, inquire of me, like just whatever. Okay, it doesn't have to be related to the thing. Anybody want to hear like some cool, there I was sort of stories from, I don't know, criminal law questions? Anybody? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You dissected that like a surgeon. That was fantastic. He'll be here again next year. We have to have him at least every year. I just wish I could be a student, but then I'd have to be in the military, and I'm way too old, at the Command General Staff College, where he teaches and forms young minds from all over the world about history. So thank you for coming. Please stay, enjoy yourself, have some coffee, and we hope to see you tomorrow, behind the scenes tour at Westfest on September 21st or next month, October 11th. Have a good evening. Have a happy Friday the 13th.